Do you want to zoom through maps, do tons of burst damage, or recreate a Michael Bay film with how many explosions you can create? Well, then maybe you want to play the Pyro Infernalist Witch build for Path of Exile 2. I've been playing a lot of Witch and trying to create a Pyromancer playstyle, and I've gone through many different iterations of this build, but I finally found one that feels really powerful and really fun, and I've been using it in the endgame maps, and it felt really effective, and I'm having tons of fun. So I'm going to share that build with you guys right now, showing you the items that I use, the skill gem combinations, and the combos that I use. So the main idea is we want to go for the Infernalist Ascendancy for the Witch. We're going to be using sorceress spells basically with the Witch Ascendancy. Now, this doesn't really matter because spells are not really tied to a class, they're tied to a stat type, which is intelligence. We're going to essentially go for a Pyromancer playstyle. And what's important is we need to be essentially getting this ascendancy before this build comes online. And so at first, when you're leveling, you don't want to try to play this build necessarily. You could just go for a Witch minion build and don't go too far into the minion damage. You want to just go for the energy shield at first because that's going to give you some global defense, which is useful if you're a minion build, but also going to be useful for this build as well later on. And then we're going to head north into fire damage. We want to get fire damage for this build because we're going to be using big fire damage spells from the sorceress trait line. So just go for fire damage, energy shield, and you can see I go over here as well because there's some fire nodes, and at level 72ish I've gotten to over here where there's some other juicy fire nodes. So just go for fire damage and energy shield, and that's pretty much it. But what's important about the Infernalist is that it gives us the demonic possession form. So one trade-off of this form is that while you are in any transform, you do not get access to your weapon. So you can't use any skills that you had for your weapon. Any stats that you got from that weapon are gone. That also is kind of nice because you don't have to worry about getting a really good staff or any kind of weapon because it's not going to be useful in your form, and we want to be in the form non-stop. Another trade-off to the demon form is that the longer you stay in the form, the more stacks of demon flame you get, and you lose life the more stacks you have. So at 10 stacks, we lose 5% of our max health per second. And what I've done here is I've gone for the trait here that makes it stop at 10, so it doesn't go even higher, which essentially means that we can stay in the demon form permanently so long as we have enough health regeneration to counteract that. So I've got here 77 health regeneration per second, which is gonna make it so that I'm basically losing 1 or 2 health per second. If you want to go for a little bit more so that it doesn't go down and it just goes up, then you could go for a little bit more, but this is what I have. So essentially we're losing health while in the form, but we get a lot of benefits by being in the form, such as being able to dodge further, and that gives us a lot of mobility to go through traps during the trials. Against bosses, a lot of times you can avoid their mechanics entirely by just getting out of range of them instead of timing your dodge. So it's kind of like an easier to play playstyle in some ways, because while there is risk to it, there is so much power to it that it makes other things trivialized. Now also while you're in the demon form, so you get the extra dodge, but you also, all of your spells are leveled up by 5. So if I have a level 15 skill gem here, so it had an extra modifier there, and so now this is a level 21 spell, so the base damage goes up really high, and that means it's also going to cost a lot of mana. So witches normally don't need mana, but when you're in the demon form, your mana is going to be a scarcity. So we need to counteract that by, I'll show in the build, by making it a little bit conservative. So Firebolt, don't worry about that because that's a weapon skill. But in the demon form, we have Cannibalism, which heals us whenever we kill someone. Really important to get that healing. We got Clarity. This is going to give us more mana regeneration while we're in the demon form. And then Herbalism, which is going to give us more flask recovery. And Second Wind, which is really important because sometimes in the story or whatever, you're going to be interacting with something and that takes you out of your form. and then you can't enter the form again for 20 seconds. This gives you a secondary like ammo to use, and so if you leave it, you can re-enter it immediately, and that'll allow you to have 0 downtime on your demon form. Now, the main skill combo that we are going to be using is the Ember Fusillade and the Fireball. So how Ember Fusillade works normally, I'll take off my skill gems just to show it. You cast the skill, and then it will put an ember, and then after a delay, it shoots that 1 ember. And I've also got the Raging Spirits here, which is going to summon these, but that's not too important to know yet. So now what I'm going to do is use Unleash. And Unleash basically is going to recast your spell whenever you cast it. And you can see I've got a 2 here on this thing. That means it's going to recast it twice. So now you can see I have 3 embers. It's going to shoot 3 embers for 1 cast. It increases the spell cost, but it's going to make it a lot faster to get those stacks up. And this does more damage the more that have been shot. So I can use Scatter Shot as well, which also doubles projectiles. So now I can use 1 cast and I can get 3 of them, and then it doubles, and somehow I've got 8. So I don't know how it gets to 8 there, because the math is not mathing. It should be 6, but it gets to 8. So 1 cast of that is 8, and that can do a lot of damage. As you can see, the DPS is 1294, and all I've done was cast 1 spell. Now if I use that in demon form, it's going to be even higher, 2000. So, and it goes right even higher because Demon Flame hasn't even stacked up yet. So we get a lot of damage from being in Demon Flame, you can see, and we get also Pierce because we wanted to do AoE. Usually when you're in maps or content like that, mobs are going to run at you in a straight file line because they're running through like a corridor, and you want to pierce them with this big damage. So we're not investing too much into the damage of it, but into the speed at which we can use it, because we're going to be using other skills like Fireball. So Fireball is also interesting because normally it's not very great. We throw it, and when it explodes, it does damage and will create a fan of other projectiles. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fork it, which creates 2 other fireballs when it basically impacts. And those 2 other fireballs can then impact and create other fans of projectiles. And this is really good in AoE situations where you've got, say, 4 mobs together. You're going to shoot a fireball at them, and it's going to fork and immediately hit those other 2 mobs next to them, and then create 3 fans basically next to all of those enemies, and they're all going to get hit several times with all those AoEs. And we can also go even crazier with Wild Shards, which 20% chance creates 8 additional projectiles in a circle. So if we get that to trigger, we're going to create all of those fans times 8 with the forking. And we're going to put Inspiration in there as well, because Fireball can get quite costly with the extra levels, and this gives us extra cost multiplier on these 2. So we're going to show the Fireball how it can pretty much do tons of damage here. So sometimes we can get the proc here, and we're going to be spamming fireballs in these AoE situations. And there it is. That's the Wild Shards trigger. So if that triggers and you're in a like cramped space or a narrow corridor, all of those projectiles bouncing everywhere is really good. So we want to make sure that we are throwing our fireball at someone who is near another enemy or at a wall. If you throw it at a wall, then it forks and will create more bouncing projectiles. If you shoot it out into open terrain like that, it doesn't bounce. So you want it to hit someone for sure, and you want it to bounce immediately. So at a wall or at a group of enemies. If you're fighting one boss, don't use Fireball. So we're going to talk about what we use otherwise. So we have Flame Wall. Flame Wall, we have normally it's just a wall, right? But we have Fortress, which makes it a circle, and then Cascade, which makes it 3 circles. So we cast Flame Wall, and we get massive fire all over the place, which is going to give Ignite to many targets, which we have a lot of. The passive tree is going to give us like Ignite damage. We have Persistence, which makes them last longer, so I don't have to cast this very often. I want to set it and forget it, because what I'm really using it for is to get projectiles to shoot through it. So when I get projectiles to shoot through my firewall, it will do extra damage. And I can use one cast of my Ember Fusillade, and that's 8 projectiles, and every projectile gets added bonus damage, which means it's scaling up the more projectiles you're using. And because we're using 8 of these, it's multiplying very fast, because all we do is this, and then we shoot that. So against single targets, that Ember Fusillade does huge damage, and against multiple enemies, like a horde of mobs, what we want to do is we use the flame walls, and then we want to use the fireball, because the fireballs are also projectiles, which you can kind of see a DNA-like structure to the projectiles when it goes through the field. It looks sort of singular, and then when it goes through the fire, it has that kind of spiral to it, the helix shape to it. So that means that those are all getting the projectile bonus from going through a firewall too. Raging Spirits is also important, because whenever we use a fire skill, we are going to create a spirit. These spirits are like minions. We don't really invest in minions, so the damage that they do is not important, but they give vitality, and they're going to be constantly out because I'm constantly using spells. So they give me vitality, which gives me life, which means that while in the demon form, I'm not just dying. And then whenever I summon them, I have Infernal Legion, which immediately burns them because the mobs are burning anyone near them. And then whenever they burn, they give fire exposure. So everything that I cast is essentially giving fire exposure. Now, there's other things we can do, because we've got a single target that's very far range with the embers. And those are kind of nice because they can sort of auto aim. And then we've got massive AoE in clumped up groups. But what about situations where enemies are ranged or they're not sticking together, right? Well, we've got Solar Orb with Flame Blast. So we've got our first 2 combos. Here's the 3rd combo. Solar Orb just throws down this AoE. Not very great. But we do have Mana Font on it. So while we're next to it, it's giving us mana. Not the best, but it does something. And we've got Bludgeon on it as well, so it can do a little bit of CC. There's not really much you need for the Solar Orb, because we're mostly using it for the Flame Blast, which when we cast this, creates a big AoE around us. It gets larger and does more damage as you channel it. And it kills you if you're using my thing here, because it's using up a lot of mana. And then it does a huge blast. Now you can target a Solar Orb with that by using your mouse cursor over it. And now it's over that, and it casts faster over that too. So ideally you want to be casting a Solar Orb and then targeting it and then using the Flame Blast. And this can oftentimes one-shot a lot of those groups of mobs. But it's very slow because you have to cast something which gives you basically no value. And then you have to cast another thing which can be interrupted, and then you get 0 value out of that. So it's very risky to use, and you only want to use it in situations where you've got cover or mobs are not being very aggressive. We've also got Incinerate. Now this, we've got Expanse on it, so it gives an extra 6 seconds cooldown, and it has wider range. We also got Mobility, so while we're doing this, we lose less movement speed while casting. And then we've got Searing Flame, which just makes Ignite do more damage. This is just nice because it's very mobile. You could be shooting at a mob that is moving at you very slowly and just constantly hitting them. So this is like a kiting skill. It's not great damage, it's just consistent damage. So if you really need to keep moving and you can't stop, but you don't want to be moving too fast because you still need to cast something, Incinerate's nice. Now I've got some defensive ice skills as well. So Frost Wall creates a Frost Wall, obviously, and we've got Spell Echo here as well, which doubles it. So they've got to go through basically 2 walls here to get through, and that's great for choke points because you can burn someone through the choke point. You can cast the orb through there and flame burst them through it while they're trying to get through your ice walls. So that's why it's really important that they're double wrapped ice walls so that you have more time to use this. Now let's talk about how this build works in a mapping / boss scenario. While you're fighting groups of mobs, generally you want to be keeping your distance, using a burst skill, and then use a dodge to get your distance again. And we're going to be using the Ember Fusillade, and then Fireball as soon as they get close or clumped up. Or we're going to be using the Ice Wall immediately if we think that they're too tanky to immediately burst with our combo. So when we get run down by these enemies, there's going to be a lot of dodging necessary, but because you move so much, you can easily get yourself caught in a dead end, get yourself cornered, or just run into the mobs too far. It's really important to understand that the dodge given to you by this form, it's the same as the other ones in that you can move while dodging and change the direction that you're dodging, but because you move so far, this is even more amplified. So you need to be changing direction mid-dodge to weave in between the enemies and kind of correct if you dodge too far. Because if you dodge into the enemy and then you're right in their face and then they swarm you, then you could just instantly die. So you're dodging and then changing direction immediately to get that very precise positioning that you need to be able to cast your spell. And then it takes you only 2 animations because you've got that increased cast speed and you're only using 1 Ember cast and then Fireball, which is not the fastest cast time, but it's still only 1 cast time. So you're doing like 1.5 cast times and then you're back to dodging. And then you do it again because the Ember already has full stacks ready to be cast again. So you're just doing like 2 spells, the Ember into Fireball or the Ember into the Flame Wall or the Fireball into the Flame Wall, and then you dodge away. And that's going to keep you very safe, and the enemies are going to keep running at you while you're just shooting fireballs back at them. And that's pretty much how it works. If you really need to, because you're getting swarmed by bosses that move faster than you somehow, then you can just use the Ice Wall. And if enemies are line of sighting you or they have a lot of range, then you're going to be using the Solar Orb, and that's generally better for situations where enemies are not that aggressive on you. So you've kind of got all the bases covered. Use the Ember against bosses, use the Solar Flame Burst against range, and use the Flame Wall and the Ember / Fireball against melee. And you're going to be pretty good as long as you just dodge and stay out of harm's way. So if you do end up running this build and you enjoy it, please let me know in the comments below. And if you found this helpful at all, of course, subscribe, because I'll be making more fun and effective builds for Path of Exile 2. With that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.